Hello, everybody, and good morning. My name is Arleth, and you're watching World Talks here on TVP World. EU member states reached a preliminary agreement on Wednesday, granting Ukraine a €90 billion loan and imposing the 20th sanctions package against Russia. And today is the day that decision is expected to be formally accepted by national governments. As Europe takes decisive action to support Ukraine and the U.S. is busy in the Middle East, Kyiv has reached out to Ankara to facilitate a meeting between President Zelensky and Putin. Now joining me to discuss these developments and more is Bohdan Nahaylo, editor-in-chief at Kyiv Post. Good morning, hello, and thanks for joining us today.
Greetings from Kyiv.
Yes, now €90 billion loan for Ukraine and a 20th sanctions package is supposed to formally go through today. And of course, oil supplies to Slovakia and to Hungary are flowing again. How significant is this? And if you could just please remind our viewers about exactly what this money is needed for and how it'll be used.
Well, the money is needed for keeping the Ukrainian economy afloat, basically, because the war is in its fifth year, and a lot of the money is going into weapons, into the army, but the economy has been badly damaged by the war, and to keep payments of one sort or another going, whether it's from pensions to keeping the infrastructure standing, this money is badly needed over the next few years until some kind of deal is reached or Russia is defeated.
Yes, now Ukraine's 2026 budget is still short by about 20 billion euros. That's quite a significant sum. So what's your estimate, basically, with still such large amounts of money being needed? Will Ukraine be able to take the money it does receive and be able to innovate? And do you see innovation in the future for Ukraine this year?
Well, we've seen innovation on a massive scale in the last year or two. I mean, the war has precipitated creativity and innovation, primarily, of course, in the defense sector, but in other sectors too. I think that the Ukrainians badly need this money, this inflow right now, just to stay afloat, as I've said, but we'll be reaching out to other countries, perhaps not the typical supporters and allies, but new friends, new potential business partners. For example, who would have imagined a year ago that the Ukrainians would be making business deals, defense arrangements with some of the Gulf states, for instance. So I think the situation is fluid, unpredictable, and I think that the Ukrainians are hoping that as long as they're secure for the immediate term, that they'll find other means of filling the gap.
Yes, now the EU will soon have its 20th sanctions package, if all goes well today, which I expect that it will. But the foreign minister, Sybiha, is already calling for more sanctions. What will and what won't these sanctions do, the European Union's 20th sanctions package?
Well, they step up the pressure on Moscow in various sectors. They make life tougher for Putin, and we have signs that there are serious grumblings, not only amongst the population because of the discomfort, shall we call it that, euphemistically, that the Russian society has been facing, particularly in the last year and a half. I'm not even talking about casualties and loss of sons and husbands, but damage to the economy from the rather daring strikes that the Ukrainians are now capable of delivering well within Russia, hitting particularly the energy infrastructure and making one of the world's most important oil exporters suffer at home from the damage that has been caused. Now, the grumblings that we see are at the top. Now, we're getting top economists, top businessmen saying, hey, what are we doing? We're not winning. This stalemate is costing us dearly. So whatever additional pressure is brought by a new round of sanctions helps in the longer term, because Russia has been, as we've seen, reluctant to reach any kind of deal. It's all or nothing, particularly with Trump in the White House going along with this and trying to pressure Ukraine to concede territory. So, it's not really the figures that are important. It's both the symbolism and the additional pressure that, on top of already the significant sanctions that are at work.
Yes, and the Ukrainians, well, their sanctions have been the most effective. These deep strikes on energy infrastructure in Ukraine, in Russia, excuse me, so they simply can't sell the oil and export it. Do you think that Ukraine has kind of turned the corner when it comes to projecting power finally in this war deep into Russia? We see these attacks almost daily now. So is this a new capability that Ukraine has firmly established, do you believe?
Most definitely. I think the Ukrainians are far more confident now because of the well-targeted strikes. They're not just random strikes like the Russian ones tend to be, that hit some infrastructure, but mainly hit cities and civilians, and terror attacks. The Ukrainian ones are rather well thought out and guided, hitting major oil hubs or gas hubs or ports, and really damaging the once invincible, supposedly, economic infrastructure of Russia. And also you note this in the change of approach and even rhetoric of Zelensky. If a few months ago he was almost cowering before Trump, begging him to come in, wade in, support the Europeans in their support for Ukraine. Right now, the message seems to be, okay, you're not interested. We'll try and work things out with our European partners. Thanks, but no thanks. We're not going to make these very serious concessions that you are calling on. And I think he's really called Trump's bluff, and also, shall we say, almost implicitly ridiculed the fact that he's got businessmen and relatives doing negotiations on his behalf, going frequently to Moscow, but not even bothering to turn up in Kyiv. And therefore, he also is showing the world, Zelensky, that he still continues pushing for some kind of settlement and wants to involve, for example, Turkey, which is, after all, a neighbor across the Black Sea of Ukraine, a formidable power in its own right, and one that could fit in, if they so choose in Turkey, into a new security architecture involving some of the major European players.
Yes, indeed. I think that's actually a significant development with President Zelensky reaching out to Turkey to try and facilitate talks. Doesn't that demonstrate that the United States is no longer the candidate of choice, and that new formats are something that Kyiv is going to pursue? And do you see a future for the Europeans in this process? Potentially, especially with the situation in the Middle East and the United States being busy with that?
Yeah, I think we reached a turning point a few weeks ago. It's both the U.S. attitude towards European countries, get into line, do what we tell you to do, as regards Iran, for example, or even on Gaza, the support for Israel, despite the protests from some of the European countries about the manner and the excessive responses of Israel. And then followed up by Europe being further galvanized by all of this, and by Trump's totally, shall we say, disrespectful rhetoric towards European countries, never mind Ukraine. And then we saw the results in the last Ramstein meeting and the various pledges, not only to keep supporting Ukraine, but to enter into, shall we say, defense sector industrial long-term arrangements, which means not simply giving cash and weapons to Ukrainians when they're available, if the Americans decide to sell these weapons to Europe to forward to Ukraine, but actually to produce these weapons within Europe in collaboration with Ukraine. The difficulty here is that this is a breakthrough, and psychologically it's very important, but for the moment there's a delay because clearly production is going to take months, if not a year or two. And so it's good for the Ukrainians, but they still have to sit it out, wait, and hold firm in the meantime. But at least there's much stronger support from Europe, and even the Japanese, as you've noticed, have agreed finally to begin selling some of their weapons abroad, which means, read between the lines, Ukraine primarily. And they have their equivalent of Patriot missile systems that they've developed and would be very useful for the Ukrainians.
Well, and with Europe, it seems like it's not really a zero-sum game, but it's rather a win-win. I realize this will take some time, but the more joint production that they can do, and especially if Europe is funding everything right now, it should be made in Europe.
Exactly. And look, that message is getting across to Trump. I know he's fixated on Iran, and there's quite a fiasco happening. And he's also painted himself into a corner with Europe and with Canada, for that matter, and perhaps even with some of the Asian countries and Middle Eastern countries. So it's a very bad situation, and one hopes that parallel to the development of the defense sector, the beefing up of it, and Europe's ability to rely on its own defenses rather than count on the US, that at the same time the Ukraine itself will manage to hold its ground, inflict more serious damage, and withstand any potential attempted new incursions, new offensives that the Russians might launch. And hopefully, the discontent within Russia itself will pay dividends too, because we've not seen this level of grumbling throughout society, but especially in top quarters with top bankers and economists telling Putin that the economy is in a shambles and there's no quick fix.
And very briefly, the United States military has deployed the Ukrainian anti-drone system SkyMap at a key American base in Saudi Arabia. Despite what Trump says, does the U.S. military realize just how important and critical Ukraine and its experience is in this type of technology?
I can only agree with what you say. This, I think, is the most, shall we say, degrading element for the White House. The fact that its own military say we need Ukrainian know-how and the advances it has made in the drone sector in particular, the way that warfare has changed so radically in this Russia-Ukraine war, and that the Ukrainians are now pioneers and they've got a lot to share with us, if not to teach us. So that, gives Zelensky the cards that Trump once said he hadn't got, and Trump can no longer treat him as a little boy, a nuisance, and refusing to do as he's being told.
Certainly. Well, let's hope this ushers in a new era of cooperation here in Europe and beyond. Bohdan Nahaylo, editor-in-chief at Kyiv Post, thank you so much. And that concludes this edition of World Talks. Thanks for joining us, and stay with us for more here on TVP World.